Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington Realtors legal hotline lawyer. Because of this crazy seller market and this absolute lack of inventory, there's a question that I'm hearing over and over and over again, and it is a very dangerous question. And here's the question. The question goes something like this. Since there is no statewide form for seller contingencies, what language could I use in a purchase and sale agreement to protect my seller from having to close the transaction if my seller can't find a replacement property? The answer to the question is there's no statewide form covering that topic because that is a contingency that does not work if you're a member of a multiple listing service. Think about what the multiple listing service says. The multiple listing service says from one firm member, listing firm, to another firm member, the buyer broker's firm, hey, listing firm says to buyer broker firm, hey, buyer broker firm, if you provide a ready, willing, and able buyer for us, we will pay you a selling office compensation. If you inject this seller contingency, what you're saying is, hey, buyer broker's office, if you bring us a ready, willing, and able buyer, we'll pay you a selling office compensation, maybe. We haven't really decided yet. We have decided, but really, in fact, the seller hasn't decided yet. And in fact, buyer broker, come on over, bring your buyer, let them do an inspection, let them pay for an appraisal, let them make their whole loan application, and then sometime before we get to closing, we'll let you know whether or not your buyer is going to be able to close that transaction, and if they do, we'll pay you selling office compensation. I think most of you can probably see the problem with a seller contingency. It does not work in a multiple listing setting. Moreover, the language that I have seen brokers draft, and I've seen a lot of brokers drafting this language, the language that I have seen brokers drafting will, if it's effective, give the seller the right to terminate the transaction. Okay, let's assume that happens. Let's assume that buyer and seller reach an agreement and buyer's fine with seller terminating the transaction sometime prior to closing. Listing broker, what about the fact that you and your firm have extended an offer of compensation to the buyer broker's firm? Nothing about the language that releases seller from an obligation to sell to buyer releases the listing broker's firm from payment of selling office compensation to the buyer broker's firm when the buyer broker did, in fact, bring a ready, willing, and able buyer. Finally, if I haven't convinced you yet, check with your own MLS, because there's a very good chance that your MLS has a policy that prohibits listings that include a seller contingency. They are unlawful, if you will, under most MLSs and MLS rules. And the reason that rules prohibit them are the reasons that we've already discussed. You cannot have a viable selling office compensation, offer of compensation in response for bringing a ready, willing, and able buyer if the seller's obligation or the listing firm's obligation to pay that compensation is conditional. It just doesn't work. If you have questions on this topic or any other, send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.